Hello everyone, Brad Johnson here, and in this video I'm going to be channeling Adronis, and Adronis is going to be talking about dimensional veils. We will speak to you today as it relates to the insight regarding Earth's dimensional veils. Now again, where you are headed as a society, you will notice that there is a convergence happening. A convergence where you are looking at things that may seem unexplained. Some of these dimensional veils appear very much similar to what you are experiencing here in physical reality with what you are familiar with. Such examples can be seeing mirror cities. Cities, again, across lands that may be on the same plane of elevation, or it may also be within the sky itself. These particular dimensional veils are opening themselves up, basically like looking at the hologram of different mirrors that are appearing. These particular forms of dimensional mirrors that are taking place are all part and parcel of this new shift, this new transition taking place. So whether you are looking at floating cities in the sky or looking at other particular forms of realities that are converging upon your own, as it may represent cities or landscapes, even people that are able to impose themselves into your reality, where they may be aware or even unaware that they have actually ventured into an earth that is parallel to their own. For example, they may have been part of an earth whose origins relating to countries may be of a very different name. They may actually have other names as it relates to that particular country in question. But to them, they have no idea that they have actually moved from one dimension to another. These are basically, in that sense, what we could refer to as bleed-throughs, or Swiss cheese within the veil. The aspect that there are holes, gapping, in between realities. And that some of you, again, may just notice that you're walking down a street and within an instance, through flawless transition, you are now moving into another earth briefly, where the history may be quite different from your own. The continuity as to what you would know as common ground may be quite different to your own. Now these in that sense are, shall we say, very common instances that do take place. And again, the reason why you're having bleed-throughs is because your own earth is changing. The grid is changing. The dynamics of magnetism that is actually holding all of these dimensional constructs together is rearranging itself. As it is metamorphosizing, as it is rearranging itself, these different interdimensional planes will bleed through one plane to another, will bleed through one reality to another. And so you will discover that you are intersecting different parallel planes that are not conjunct to your own form of, shall we say, causality, but more so in the idea of how they are intersecting in different ways as it pertains to, shall we say, different reality themes. So the continuity may be off. You may just be walking down a street and then all of a sudden notice something that you felt was not there before. You may close your eyes for a moment, you open them up, and now you notice that that area is now back to normal. Well, again, that is you being able to cross a dimensional plane for a very short amount of time and being able to snap back. There are those in that sense who can visit for days, who will actually be in a completely different earth, just walking down the street to where there is a magnetic pole, or shall we say shift taking place, another veil opening and moving that person into another parallel earth. For example, your own continuity-based plane. And they coming from a very different reality altogether. So these are, again, common factors that can happen. They occur through certain forms of alignments that are taking place at this time. Sometimes they are solar, sometimes they are lunar, sometimes they are planetary. Sometimes they do affect, again, certain forms of what you would know as tally up dates, that could represent that of equinoxes or solstices. These particular forms of phases do happen, rippling themselves together. This can even happen in the idea of your evening times throughout your planet, as the idea to darkness in that sense is opening up the widest amount of veils possible for spirit, for the intelligence of different dimensions and domains to interlock themselves by, again, moving through these different forms of, shall we say, malleability shifts. And so those are certain forms of dimensional veils that are happening. Now, basically, as many of you may know, or some of you may not, when you are exploring these different realms, you will understand that life in many different forms occupies the same space as you do. It is because of veils, it is because of filters, it is because of buffers that you may not be aware that other incredible forms of life exist around you. What we mean is that you may basically, in one dimension, see beings that are trees walking around. You may also see humanoid-like beings that may have pointy ears, that may have curly hair, that may only be, in that sense, a couple of feet tall, walking around. At times, these particular veils also can leak through, because the dimensions as it relates to malleability is affecting all of the entire plane that keeps the grid work of the Earth in all of these dimensions together. Sometimes, again, as they are shifting, just like looking at this, shall we say, malleability form of transformation taking place, these different gateways shifting, they can, again, interlock and pass by other particular planes such as yours. Being able to see rock people, being able to see giant leviathans within your oceans, are bleed-throughs. So, what many of you can refer to as the Loch Ness Monster, for example, or for those of you who have even noticed that there have been stories as it relates to dinosaurs being able to bleed through this reality for a short amount of time. This is all part of, again, this geometry, this grid of dimensions shifting around, reorbiting itself, rearranging itself so that it can interlock, so it can snap together, and being able to move more into a higher dimensional plane where many of these particular domains can also intersect in certain ways on a higher capacity. And so basically you understand that your dimensions are always moving through an incredible shift. It is becoming much more aware nowadays because of the idea of your social media. But really, this has been happening for many decades as it relates to many of these particular shifts. There have been ruptures in different dimensional fabrics, and this too can create bleed-throughs. The only time that a bleed-through in that sense snaps itself back together is when the grid reorients itself and basically forms a harmonic geometry where the aspects of these different dimensional grids no longer need to intersect through bleed-throughs, but they are now comprised. They are now comprised, they are now in a state of equilibrium. And now that they are in a state of equilibrium, the aspects of bleed-throughs will be quite minimalized. That does not mean that there will not be dimensional opening points, but they will be much more stabilized in this way. But because there has been, in that sense, a great deal of advancements in technology that have been obviously conjuring much of the disturbances within these dimensional planes, this can cause these tears, these ripples, these bleed-throughs of different dimensions as they happen. As you have an ancient history, as it relates to different dimensional tears and dimensional bleed-throughs, these particular realities can take place, intersecting in different ways. For thousands of years, in fact, there has been much of the forms of, shall we say, meddling with the degrees of different dimensional gateway points. Certain forms of societies, certain forms of cultures, certain forms of sects and factions have worked together to open different forms of dimensional portals as it relates to something pertaining to personal gain or something that may represent the idea of sacred ceremony. But nonetheless, many of these forms of dimensions have been opened up. Primarily to when many of these dimensions have been opened up have been during the time of your Atlantean disaster, where many of the dimensional fabrics were torn. So throughout those times, there have been much of an effort attempting to put together much of this grid itself back into equilibrium, back into balance. So where there has been these particular challenges of attempting to restore balance, there are certain areas on your planet that are still quite prone to having many of these bleed-throughs taking place. So whether it's seeing cities, whether it's meeting other people from different dimensions, whether it's seeing other creatures, beings again that may look very small in human form or very large in human form, whether it may be meeting leviathans, whether it be in that sense having enormous creatures, again, rock in formation or tree in formation. Many of these different beings exist, but because, again, there is a Swiss cheese effect in many of these particular forms of veils, this is why many of you are noticing these bleed-throughs that can even happen in common areas on your planet. And so it can be very challenging to give the specifics about how all this is happening. But again, if you're noticing that something is out of the ordinary as it represents dimensional continuity, this is often the degree to what is taking place. So because there has, in that sense, been much of this dimensional disturbances, this is basically the effects, the side effects that are taking place as the Earth is now changing her orientation dimensionally and being able to notice many of these bleed-throughs taking place in regards to dimensional veils opening. We thank you very much for the opportunity of this interaction today. I am Adronis of Sirius. Thank you again. Farewell for this timing, and we now return to the conduit. We will speak to you again, as now is forever, and all is one. Goodbye for now.